Welcome to part 5 of our guide to interpreting CEESAT reliability criteria for use in CEEDER, the CE database of evidence reviews. My name is Andrew Pullin and I am presenting this series of short videos. In this part, I'll be covering the interpretation of Criterion 5, Critical Appraisal of Primary Study Validity. It's important to note that this criterion is not used in the assessment of evidence overviews, only for evidence reviews. For a user to assess the reliability of review findings, the validity of the included primary studies should be clear. Unfortunately, an estimate of primary study validity is rarely conducted in environmental reviews. All primary studies are at risk of bias, and the rigor of their scientific methods are key to reducing this bias. Consequently, not all primary studies have the same risk of bias, and yet most reviews ignore this and treat all primary study outcome data as of the same validity. Critical appraisal of primary study validity is a key component of systematic review and is used to group studies into categories of risk such as high, medium and low, based on the rigor of their methodology. The sensitivity of review findings to the inclusion or exclusion of data from study groups, such as those with high risk of bias, can then be investigated. Failure to do this risks biased estimates of effect. So, for Criterion 5.1, unlike previous criteria, our attention is switched from the conduct of the review itself to the conduct and risk of bias of the included primary studies. Ideally, the review authors should have created a checklist or use a recommended risk of bias tool to identify each type of bias and how to categorize risk. Primary studies differ in their risk of bias, most often due to limitations in study design. This is sometimes referred to as internal validity. Failure to critically appraise primary studies and estimate risk of bias means that low validity studies that have high risk of bias will contribute as much to the overall estimate of effect as higher validity studies with low risk of bias when the synthesis is conducted. So for 5.1, gold is awarded when an effort is made to identify all sources of bias relevant to individual included studies, and each type of bias is assessed and explained individually for all of those included studies. And a predetermined critical appraisal method or published tool is used, i.e. it was described and provided in a protocol. Green is awarded for the same characteristics as gold, but the critical appraisal method was not predetermined in a protocol. Amber is awarded when some characteristics of all included studies are explicitly identified as indicators of threats to validity, but not reported for individual studies, or some or all of the characteristics identified are not specifically related to a type of bias. Finally, red is awarded when no critical appraisal is conducted or all critical appraisal criteria are not applied to all individual included studies. This may include syntheses in which the methods for each study are stated but validity is not explicitly considered, or in which methodological rigor is discussed without transparent and objective assessments for each study. So essentially there's obviously some weaknesses in the way in which critical appraisal was undertaken. In Criterion 5.2, we are back to being concerned with the conduct of the review process itself. Using explicit criteria, employing more than one reviewer, and checking consistency of assessments reduces susceptibility to bias in critical appraisal decisions or errors in judgment. Why does this matter? Again, the risks of bias are the same as in 4.1 and are minimized by use of explicit and repeatable appraisal criteria, together with independent checking of decisions among reviewers. So here, gold is awarded when an effort is made to minimize subjectivity by predefining a critical appraisal process in a protocol, and at least 2 people have independently critically appraised each study with disagreements discussed and a process of resolution reported. Green is awarded when an effort is made to minimize subjectivity by predefining a critical appraisal process in a protocol, as in gold, and at least 2 people critically appraised each study, but not independently. For example, a second person may have been aware of the first person's decision. Amber is awarded when predefining of the critical appraisal process is absent, but at least 2 people critically appraised each study, or a subset of studies was appraised by at least 2 people independently. Disagreements and a process of resolution might not have been reported. Red is awarded when only 1 person critically appraised each study, or the number was not reported, or no critical appraisal was conducted at all. So thanks for listening to this presentation. I hope it was helpful in gaining an understanding of the importance of critical appraisal of primary studies for increasing the reliability of review findings to inform your decision making. If you have any questions or feedback, please use this email or visit the CEEDER website.